I think that what I would tell everyone in school, get a little experience. Even when you're
Yeah.
in school, you would hate to spend 5 to 6 years of school to go through it and think this is exactly what you want to do, this area of expertise or location or whatever it is, without really getting out and seeing what the firms do, what the clients do, what the city officials do, to really hone in on what you really like and dislike. And you may surprise
Yeah.
yourself that you may fine tune where you want to go. So
Yep.
if you can get 3 months, 4 months for a summer internship somewhere, I would recommend it. Usually we would use the people, they're not going to be doing the main presentations on a project to a very important client. It was a means where we could teach them how we go through a process of design and how you really come up with a project from beginning to end. Now, 3 months, you don't do that. You don't go from beginning to end. So
No.
hopefully we would get them involved at different phases of a project so they get a glimpse of it. And many times we would then bring those people back once they would graduate, bring them back. And it didn't have to go back to the office where they were trained in, but they could go to any office that Gensler was at.
So when you're doing the approach to the design, when you have a project, it was interesting. You mentioned city officials, all the things that you don't think about. You're thinking, oh, what colors do I like? And what layout do I like? Do I want organic lines or
what style, materials am I using?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that's what people think of, but what's the reality?
Well, the reality is a good architect will take all the information and dissimulate how it's going to go together and reach all the goals that everyone's thrown at you. As cities, they've got the building department, the fire departments, the planning departments. They have all these different groups of people who have requirements, and those are deal breakers. If you don't accommodate those things, you don't get to go forward.
And they're generally like compliance issues, like safety items and
Most of it, I mean, the building department is predominantly associated to safety. So is fire as well. Planning department is a little bit more subjective elements, but at the same time, very objective, like the zoning for projects. There's a city plan. They want things in different areas. You just don't put a gas station in the middle of a residential area without it being zoned properly. So
Right.
You can make changes to all of these things going through processes. No guarantees that it will happen, but it will slow your project down. So if your client's goal is one of their big items is speed to market, well, that would be a challenge to say, well, we may have to slow things down 6 months to a year before we will even know if you can do something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better to find a different property, that doesn't have that risk. But the building officials are one of those things. I always wanted to go to the different cities, find out who the people were that I was going to be dealing with, talk to them about the project before we even started the project to confirm codes, talk to them about the project type. In some cases, like in critical facilities, when I was doing projects in a lot of jurisdictions, they didn't even know what I was talking about. I mean, they had no idea what a switch center was or a data center was. They'd never been in one. They'd never seen one. They didn't know the code and the codes. There's nothing written specifically for them. So a lot of times you had to go and educate them. I remember a time we were up in Kent, Washington, and we were looking at doing about 1 million square feet of renovations to existing Boeing buildings, warehouses. And the city, we had a early meeting with them, and in this project, from the design side, was being led by the mechanical and electrical engineers, and we are a consultant to them. They were presenting to the city officials, and they're using their engineering speak. And I could see that the building officials had no idea what they were talking about. So when we started talking about things like, well, what are the requirements for parking or setbacks or this, that, and the other thing, the responses they were getting were completely off the rails.
Right.
So I happened to bring images of what the end result of a project is. Here are these generators. Here are these fuel tanks. Here are these mechanical units that are, those elements themselves are larger than locomotive trains. Inside, there are not people. This is not a space designed specifically for people. Not designed for people because there are critical facility projects that have a lot of people in it. But you go through it, and by the time they got done, they were, that's more like an industrial. Yes, it is. It is more like an industrial space. But the way that the code reads, it says it's a B occupancy, and B occupancies is, associated to office buildings and those kinds of places. So
Right.
their codes didn't even know how to address it. The architect had to be brought in to try to coordinate things to get the answers that you really wanted to get on the projects.
That's interesting.
Well, let's talk about the two projects that we did together. On those projects, NovaLink, you also had another name in there later on.
Yeah, it always had to do with the URLs because NovaLink.com was taken, by the time that we were building a website. I secured it down the line, but at first we were looking at what are we going to call ourselves because you want your brand to be able to be your domain name as well. And so we said, okay, well, we've got NL NovaLink. Okay, so we got that one. And then there was, for patent reasons, trademarking, NovaLink is, there's a million now NovaLinks out there, And so to differentiate us, kind of like your Rane in the middle of your name, you need to differentiate. I'm this Michael Downey, not that Michael Downey. So we became NovaLink Parametric Contract Furniture to define us that much more. Then we became NLPCF for short. So we've played around with different renditions of the name, but kind of back to NovaLink now.
So I'll just use NovaLink in general.
Yes, that sounds good.
Working with you on those projects, the first project was the PG&E Gas Operations Center, which was based off, the need for that project was based off of a gas explosion that took place in the peninsula in the San Francisco Bay Area, where quite a few people were killed. It was near SFO Airport. At first, reports were coming in on TV, and you could see these flames that were huge. They thought it was a plane crash. And as soon as I saw it, I could see it was a very constant burn, and it was, 150 feet in the air, and it wasn't dissipating. It wasn't changing. It was just shooting. And it was about an hour into it before PG&E, which is the gas and electrical provider here in our area, realized it was their lines. Now, someone probably knew something earlier on, but before it was announced that there was a gas leak, and it was I think it was bringing fuel down to the airport. The state government said that they needed to create the Gas Operations Center where they were all in one place where they could communicate better. So we ended up putting these groups together. And I think in both projects, PG&E Gas Operations Center and New York Power Authority ISOC projects, they weren't just a command center or a critical facility location. They were also workplace related. There were, I would say, in each of those locations, maybe a third of the project was critical facility and the rest of it was workplace environments. Plus, you also had to realize that this was a facility that could be manned by 3 or 4 people, with things being remote in a non-critical environment, to when something had gone really wrong and everyone is in, and they're needing to be in the command centers where the entire place is filled, and you needed places for that. So people could be there for 7x24 for multiple days. They could be staying there. You needed kitchens to cook just like you would if you were living there. So I thought the two projects were a great fusion between workplace and critical facilities. And I think that's why, to me, they were some of the best projects we did, because it wasn't just for equipment and it wasn't just for people, but it was a hybrid in one place.